such a feat was impossible. But Amasta had always believed that no legendary power could remain unsurpassed. He still held that belief. But after witnessing the mere glimpse of Gryffindor's power just now, he had to admit he had no idea how he could ever hope to stand alongside a wizard of such might. Sensing someone had entered the cabin, the oak boat glided automatically toward the swamp's center, perfectly stable, as if sliding over ice. Gradually, Amasta, like Gryffindor, became captivated by the scene around him. In the shallow water, frozen in midair mist, lay the decayed white bones of countless magical creatures. Amasta wasn't a magical creature expert, but he had seen enough to recognize some of them. Three-headed dogs, fire dragons, unicorns, pegasi, and kobolds. Many of these creatures had once been natural enemies, yet long ago they had coexisted here. Now all had been slain by the malevolent magic that permeated the island. Then, through the thickening mist, a massive humanoid skeleton gradually emerged. It appeared to belong to a giant, but the tallest giants in the magical world barely reached 20 feet, yet this skeleton was nearly as tall as the 6-story dormitory at the orphanage. Silently, Amasta studied the colossal bones and involuntarily opened his mouth. Chapter 117, Island of Death. This time, it wasn't just Amasta. Gryffindor, usually as stoic as stone, also showed a flicker of shock. Their eyes were drawn simultaneously to the enormous skeleton. Amasta felt as if he had been peeled away from reality. The oak boat wasn't drifting through the swamp. It was sailing through the river of time. Fleeting glimpses of the ancient wizarding world, older than 1,000 years, shone through the gaps in time, their mottled lights and shadows shaking him to the core. That world, still whole, a magnificent age of magic. Gryffindor finally spoke, his voice tinged with awe. But his unconscious muttering made Amasta frown. Still whole? What could he mean? Has the current world suffered any loss? A wave of regret struck Amasta. During Professor Binns' History of Magic lectures, he had spent most of his time studying spell patterns rather than listening. Perhaps then he could have understood what Gryffindor meant. But even so, these secrets belonged to a bygone era, long outside the revised magical history known to modern wizards. Even in the time of the founders, only a select few would have known. The eerie wails of ghostly creatures faded. The world fell into an eternal stillness. The boat carrying the two drifted into thicker mist, visibility reduced to barely 10 feet around. Gryffindor swung his great sword again, cutting through the air and dispelling the evil, death-laden aura. Amasta wondered whether the previous generations of druid priestesses had followed Gryffindor's temporal traces to reach Avalon's center. If not, how many sacrifices must they have endured, step by step, to reach this place? Had Amasta ventured alone, relying on no outside help, he might not have made it in several days. It was only thanks to Vedia's faith in him that he had the chance to confront the dangers of this relic. Then, through the dense mist, numerous dim yellow lights appeared, about the size of fists, hovering like lanterns and swaying gently. Amasta stiffened. Since entering the island, aside from Gryffindor, he hadn't seen a single moving thing. He raised his wand, scrutinizing the scattered lanterns, trying to guess what they might be. Unconsciously, he straightened from his half-crouch, placing one foot on the boat's steady gunwale, leaning halfway over the surface of the mirror-like, undisturbed water. The lanterns began flickering faster and faster. Hundreds of dim, yellowish light orbs radiated an uncanny magical aura. Amasta felt a shiver of unease. Through the magic, he sensed a strong enchantment. Just as he was about to forcefully break his gaze and reclaim his body, the orbs suddenly flared as if provoked. Caught off guard, dizziness swept over him, and his unsteady body plunged straight into the lake. Boom! Like a drop of water hitting a scalding pot of oil, the previously calm lake erupted, mist and all, boiling and churning violently. The entire world shook. What an utter humiliation. The instant he lost his balance, Amasta realized he had been trapped. At the same time, he understood what those lanterns really were. A group of hinky-punks, swamp-dwelling trickster spirits that delight in misleading wizards. Existing in the peculiar state between illusion and reality, they had somehow survived death, and under the corrupting influence of the death and decay magic in this place, they had grown several times stronger. As a highly capable wizard, Amasta was agile. From plunging into the water to righting himself and climbing back onto the boat, It took him less than 3 seconds. Yet the world around him continued to quake, the chaos only intensifying. "Gryffindor," he called out, forcing a humor into his tone as he watched the rising skeletal forms around him. "Any chance you could speed up this boat, sir? Seems I've stirred up a little trouble." Godric Gryffindor, unaffected by the skeletal remains that awoke at Amasta's presence, ignored him completely. Of course, he did not exist in this moment of time and space and could offer no aid. Crash! The silent, death-infused world suddenly whipped into a frenzy, the shallow lake erupting in towering waves. Mist scattered in the violent wind, and the skeletal remains of three-headed dogs, fire dragons, and Pegasi stirred, while even the titan-sized skeletons previously glimpsed rose upright. Hollow eye sockets locked precisely on Amasta, the intentions of this undead army unmistakable. "If Thanatos saw you, I'm sure he'd be drooling," Amasta muttered, masking his dread with a wry joke. Magical energy surged endlessly from him, billowing his robes off while his light brown eyes gleamed with stern resolve. "Roar!" The skeletal giant bellowed, the waves of dark magic crashing violently. Even the cleansed area Gryffindor had made was tainted, and Amasta once again felt the oppressive weight of death saturating this place. The fire dragon swooped from above. The three-headed dog slammed its grotesque heads across the waves, snapping and charging. In an instant, Amasta was surrounded. As the skeletal fire dragon closed to within 100 feet of the oak boat, Amasta swung his wand in a wide arc. A deafening hiss accompanied the emergence of a colossal water serpent, its size rivaling a giant. With a tail strike weighing tons, it smashed the smaller fire dragons and three-headed dogs into bone shards, scattering them across the waves. In the sparse, scorched forest, the two massive beings faced each other, tension radiating an indescribable aura of menace. Boom! A shockwave, as intense as a meteor strike, swept across the scene, overturning everything in sight. The skeletal giant clasped the water serpent's head in its colossal hands, bones locking with a sickening snap, crushing it. Amasta remained unfazed. Twisting his wand, he reformed the serpent's head from the splashing water, and simultaneously, the immense serpent wrapped around the skeletal giant's body, crushing with full force. Whoosh! The clash of these two epic magical constructs struck the soul like nothing else. Amasta, standing inside the white barrier, protecting the oak boat, hair tousled, cheeks flushed, felt an unprecedented exhilaration washing over him. "Show me what you've got, big guys." His eyes blazed, and he shouted with excitement. The tip of his ebony wand erupted with magical fire. Golden flames ignited the lake, bathing the gray sky in molten light. Within moments, another colossal serpent of golden flame descended. Its roar rippled through the air, unsettling the space itself. The two giant serpents coiled around the skeletal giant, heads entwining its massive arms. Their bodies contracted with immense force, each movement shaking the ground like an earthquake. Steel-like cracks rang out, twisting and bending in the air with a bone-chilling resonance. The skeletal giant roared repeatedly, but no matter how many times it crushed the serpents' heads, Amasta instantly restored them, continuing the battle. Honestly, since his days at Hogwarts, fighting that dark witch in the Forbidden Forest, he had never unleashed his full power so ruthlessly. The little boat pressed onward. In the distance, the vague silhouette of a grand, imposing temple began to emerge. Chapter 118, The Temple and the Frescoes. Thud! Thud! After a battle that had turned the land into a ruined wasteland, Amasta leapt from the oak boat and stood on the riverbank, wiping the sweat from his brow. He pulled out several bottles of magical potions and drank them in rapid succession. The rare elixirs, worth thousands of galleons, slid down his throat, leaving him smacking his lips as if savoring every drop. The moment his feet touched solid ground, the skeletal remains that had been moving in the swamp fell still, as if acknowledging a trial Amasta had passed through sheer strength. Clang. Whoosh. He tossed aside a few empty bottles and, surveying the scarred swamp, exhaled with satisfaction. Yet when he checked the reserves of magical energy in his body and eyes, a wry smile tugged at his lips. Thrilling, certainly thrilling. Now, let's hope no more trouble shows up next. With that, he delivered a sharp kick to the ugly, one-legged creature bound in magical ropes at his feet, causing it to grimace in pain. These hinky-punks, nourished by the island's dense, malignant magic, had already gained tangible forms. an unusual and rare occurrence. Amasta scooped up one that hadn't been caught in the earlier battle, planning to take it out for further study. After securing the creature, he turned to find Gryffindor had already climbed a gentle slope along a path overgrown with withered brambles, standing atop the rise and surveying the distant temple. Amasta didn't dare linger. He jogged after him. Though Gryffindor's presence was only a shadow recorded by the chaotic flow of time and magic, following him gave Amasta an inexplicable sense of security. Truly, Godric Gryffindor was the sort of man who inspired confidence. At the center of the island stood a vast temple, heavy with the weight of history, silently enduring the passage of untold centuries. Amasta's eyelashes trembled as he studied it, his face marked by a trace of puzzlement. Perched atop its steps, the rectangular temple was built entirely of gleaming white marble. Nearly 100 massive marble columns supported the structure, yet the walls themselves were dilapidated, riddled with holes where entire sections had collapsed. This was a classic example of ancient Greek temple architecture, and it was exactly this that puzzled Amasta. As the sacred heart of the ancient Druidic order, rumored to lie at the center of the mysterious Avalon Island, why on earth should a Greek-style temple appear here? It was as incongruous as if Hogwarts Castle had been replaced by a Chinese palace, utterly illogical. Amasta had expected to find a grand wooden palace built atop enormous oak trees, not marble columns rising from a temple reminiscent of the Mediterranean. Creona is in there, isn't she? Amasta's gaze passed over Gryffindor's powerful frame toward the temple. He could faintly sense the direction of her magic. After a brief pause, he raised his wand to conceal his aura and hide his presence. Before meeting Vetia, he wanted to explore alongside Gryffindor first. Surprisingly, the decay and death that should have saturated the space around the temple at the center of the island were not as oppressive as Amasta had expected. It was as if some strange force was restraining the spread of death. The two of them resumed walking, but they had barely gone a few steps when Amasta suddenly froze, his expression tightening. In his line of sight, multiple overlapping figures appeared ahead, and he recognized them instantly, for they were all his own back. The temporal chaos here has suddenly intensified several-fold. Seems to be the result of two powerful magics counteracting and interfering with each other. Incredible, a phenomenon I've never seen before. Amasta moved forward again, but as they drew closer to the temple, the oddities returned. Gryffindor remained completely unaffected. His path to the temple was a straight, unwavering line. Amasta, following behind, felt as though he were constantly using apparition. One moment he was just behind Gryffindor, the next he flickered further ahead, then floated above Gryffindor's head. No deep thought was required. Amasta knew the space was twisted and misaligned. Luckily, the distortion was continuous. Had there been any spatial rifts, a single misstep could have resulted in his foot being severed. Many of the strange phenomena caused by the magic here could individually support papers that would shake the wizarding world. But after seeing so much, Amasta's nerves had hardened. After all, this was the land of myths. Gryffindor did not approach the steps leading to the temple's entrance. Instead, he stopped before a collapsed section in the temple's side wall, staring into its interior. Amasta followed, studying the temple carefully. His attention was not drawn to the grand columns or the temple's majestic structure, but to the jagged, crumbling corners of the walls. He stepped forward alone, crouching and digging into the soft earth with his hands, forming a small pit. Sure enough, this temple was not originally part of Avalon Island. The entire structure was uprooted and relocated here. A temple this vast could not have been constructed without a foundation. The jagged, broken edges where the walls met the ground confirmed it. The temple had been moved from elsewhere. Is this still Harry Potter's magical world? Amasta shook his head, his expression grave. If Avalon Island truly was, as Vetia claimed, Merlin's eternal resting place, then everything before him, the temple, the floating island, all the anomalies, must have been Merlin's doing. Has Merlin already ascended to godhood? Just how powerful were the wizards of that era? Amasta's gaze reflected his astonishment. Living in the modern wizarding world, he could not fathom a time when wizards ruled the earth and were revered as gods by muggles. There are fractures in magic. Some crucial events have been forgotten or deliberately erased. He murmured this quietly, His suspicion was fueled not only by the sights before him, but also by Gryffindor's unintentional words. The world was still whole, a magnificent age of magic. Looking at the craftsmanship before him, Amasta's thoughts drifted to Voldemort's deeds. He could not suppress a sense of emptiness. Obsessed with power, obsessed with the fear of others, obsessed with immortality. No wonder, despite his formidable strength, Albus Dumbledore had always looked upon him with contempt. Voldemort's efforts to avoid death had been immense, but they were mere imitation. His magical path had long since been severed. Amasta pushed down his disdain for Voldemort and followed Gryffindor through the large hole in the temple's side wall. Surveying the interior, the ruins were as he had expected. Broken walls and debris, time and space as chaotic as the outside. One thing surprised him, however. The temple's interior magic was astonishingly pure, untouched by the outside's corrupting influence, as if it had been purified. Gryffindor behaved unusually. Normally, anyone exploring the temple for the first time would head toward the grand hall where Vetia's magic resided, but he did not. Instead, he solemnly stepped over ruins and through fractured walls, accelerating with a clear purpose in one direction. Amasta hesitated only briefly before following. Compared to the woman in the Grand Hall as a Hogwarts graduate, he clearly trusted Godric Gryffindor more. As they crossed the temple, Amasta passed many rooms. A floor covered in ash and shattered wooden shelves suggested a library. Other rooms contained indistinct skeletal remains and decayed equipment, likely research spaces. There were also living quarters, indicating that a wizard had once resided here. Gryffindor moved with incredible speed, forcing Amasta, constrained by the chaotic flow of time and space, to jog just to keep up. 20 minutes later, having navigated countless obstacles, they stopped before a massive stone wall whose colors were dull and muted. Godric Gryffindor was a figure from 1,000 years ago, and the temple itself was undoubtedly far older. Time and magical forces had ravaged the temple's interior, leaving almost nothing intact. Yet this enormous stone wall, jutting abruptly from the rubble, remained completely unscathed. Not a speck of dust had settled upon it. So, this is the battle! Gryffindor's words, uttered almost absent-mindedly, drew Amasta's attention back from his confusion over the wall's untouched condition. He tilted his head and focused on the broad stone surface, where crude carvings reminiscent of primitive cave murals traced the scenes. The first panel on the far right depicted rolling mountain ranges, ancient city-states, and lake-filled lands, a seemingly simple landscape. Yet at the top of the wall, far above the depicted terrain, was an irregular closed shape filled with chaotic lines that seemed to represent wind, like the outline of a jellyfish gliding through water. Amasta frowned, staring at the shadowy pattern. It was neither sun nor cloud, and he couldn't fully understand its meaning. But he sensed its importance. Drawn by curiosity, he moved to the second panel. Stepping back and looking up, he noticed that the jellyfish remained etched at the top of the wall, but the scene on the ground below had shifted dramatically. A tense standoff was folding across the broad expanse. On one side was a warrior astride a towering unicorn, a flowing cape trailing behind him. He wielded an ornately crafted sword and gazed coldly at the sky. Even through the simple lines, Amasta could sense the warrior's kingly aura, as if a god of war himself had taken form. Behind the warrior stretched an endless army of muggles, led by 12 equally heroic knights. The formation stood like solid iron, radiating an oppressive energy. On the opposing side stood a single figure, cloaked in black. From the delicate wrist grasping an unusual wand that protruded from the robes, Amasta guessed it was a woman. With his encyclopedic knowledge, Amasta could make a tentative guess at the identities of the opposing sides, but he said nothing, moving silently to the third panel. The war depicted was grand and devastating. Forests flattened, the earth cracked with gaping fissures, vast lakes evaporated, and even the stone expanse representing the sky bore countless fractures, as if space itself had been torn apart. The third panel's details were clearer, yet Amasta frowned. Could Muggle warriors and knights really possess the power to challenge a legendary wizard? The question lingered, but a glance at Gryffindor's silver-hilted sword offered some reassurance. The fourth panel recorded the battle's outcome. The female witch remained suspended in midair, her gaze indifferent, while blood flowed freely across the land, and Muggle limbs lay scattered in decay. The 12 knights following the warrior were gone, leaving only the warrior himself, sword in hand, his torn but still fluttering cape marking his resilience. Amasta, absorbed by the scene, had unconsciously reached the center of the wall. In the fifth panel, the warrior's mount had transformed into a Pegasus. With unyielding resolve, he charged the witch, who raised her bizarre wand to summon an enormous island that nearly filled the stone panel. Her gaze was fixed on distant city-states. Avalon Island, Amasta murmured, narrowing his eyes. He had glimpsed the island's outline while following Gryffindor earlier, and now he recognized it immediately. Another crucial detail appeared at the border between the fifth and sixth panels. An elderly wizard with flowing hair, bearing some resemblance to Dumbledore, was rushing toward the battlefield. Merlin, Amasta whispered, pressing his lips together. In Diagon Alley, a small square held a pristine marble statue of Merlin, marking the London entrance to the underground world. Amasta knew the figure well. There was no doubt. The sixth panel depicted Merlin and the warrior joining forces against the witch. The earth overturned, magma surged from beneath, and Amasta felt as though he were witnessing a divine wine war, lost to the ages. One detail particularly caught his attention. In the previous 5 panels, the jellyfish at the wall's top had remained immobile, but in the sixth, its outline trembled violently, with roughly 1/10 of it breaking free from the stone and vanishing. The 7th panel shocked Amasta and sharpened Gryffindor's gaze. By the combined might of Merlin and the warrior, the witch had fallen. She crashed onto Avalon Island from the sky. Yet a faint, shadowy outline emerged from her body, resembling the deathly wraith of the elderly wizard Amasta had once seen in the underground world, the one who had perished due to the unicorn's tail trick. By the penultimate panel, the jellyfish had disappeared entirely from the wall's top, as had the witch. The peculiar wand she had wielded now rested in the hands of the defeated wraith, who appeared ready to hurl it forward. Chapter 119, Follow Me. Amasta's emotions surged and fell with the story of the astonishing divine war recorded on the stone walls. When it all ended in desolation, a certain melancholy took root in his heart. In the final mural, the Reaper was gone. The brave warrior, sword in hand and battered from battle, had also vanished. Amasta guessed his fate. He, too, had fallen in that fight. Only Merlin remained in the painting. He stood before the temple where Amasta now stood, his gaze fixed on the jellyfish that had gradually disappeared from the 6th mural onward. Even from the simple lines depicting his figure, Amasta could sense the heavy, somber aura surrounding Merlin. Having studied all 9 murals, Amasta lingered silently before the towering wall, lost in thought. The world was still whole, so that's what it meant, Mr. Gryffindor. After a long pause, he lifted his head and looked toward Gryffindor, who stood gazing at Merlin's solitary figure before the temple, letting out a soft, contemplative sigh. Amasta began to understand. Long ago, there had been something on the earth, and the cataclysm of that war had caused it to be torn from the land. Considering how the wizarding world had steadily declined over the past millennium or two, wizards once worshipped as gods by muggles now living precariously, vulnerable even to ordinary humans. Amasta had reason to believe that this something had been of critical importance to all wizards. The 9 murals recounted the titanic battle but left its aftermath ambiguous. What became of that witch, or that Reaper-like wizard, after her defeat? Was she slain by Merlin? And where did Merlin go? Could this temple be his final resting place? The site where Avalon Island was moved into this hidden space, where he lived alone until fading into time itself. Amasta shook his head slightly, turning his gaze to Gryffindor's solemn face. Something must have happened afterward, right, Mr. Gryffindor? His suspicion was simple. Gryffindor clearly had not stumbled into this secret realm by accident. Millennia ago, the 4 founders of Hogwarts must have known some extraordinary secret and had been scheming together. From the moment Amasta had unleashed his magic upon entering the realm, Gryffindor's apparition, left behind in the chaotic flow of time, had appeared instantly. It seemed highly likely that these plans also involved him. On the other hand, Vetia's teacher, the previous druid seer, had also pulled him into the vision of prophecy. Amasta's brow furrowed. The conspiracy surrounding him exuded a palpable sense of danger. Who was the witch in the murals? Considering Muggle myths, wizarding records, and the fact that she could summon Avalon Island, an indication of her close connection to the Druids, Amasta settled on a name. Morgan Le Fay, also known as Morgana Le Fay, the legendary dark sorceress. Ancient texts described her as the Queen of Avalon, the adversary of Merlin and King Arthur with his Round Table, a goddess of darkness and death. Amasta vaguely remembered reading in a magical tome that Morgan Le Fay had long been host to a malevolent spirit. At the time, he had dismissed it as mere superstition, but the murals carved into the stone before him made him reconsider. Perhaps there was truth to it. Gryffindor ignored Amasta's contemplative state. Having absorbed the mural's information, he simply turned and with a swipe of his silver sword, cleared the ruined debris blocking his path, moving purposefully toward one direction, the front hall of the temple where Vetia awaited. Seeing this, Amasta forced down his doubts, took a deep breath, and hurried to follow. Their bizarre journey through the secret realm was nearing its climax. Along the way, Amasta pulled out several bottles of magical restorative elixirs and drank them rapidly. His body's capacity to absorb and convert magic was limited. Drinking the potions so violently caused him significant pain, yet he gritted his teeth, forcing himself to digest the magic fully, storing it in his magical organs. He was preparing himself to confront Vetia Clariona openly. The two arrived at a wall behind the main hall. Passing through a small door would lead them directly into the temple's front hall. But almost simultaneously, Gryffindor and Amasta came to a halt. Domain of chaotic time. Amasta's eyes darkened with apprehension as he gazed a few steps ahead at a hazy, spherical space that seemed to pass through the wall itself. He suspected that behind this very wall, in the temple's main hall, lay the artifact that Vetia Clariona and countless modern druids had dreamed of reclaiming, a holy relic. He also understood why, over so many centuries, none had succeeded. Amasta glanced at a stone at his feet, touched it lightly with his wand, and watched as it slowly floated into the air before accelerating suddenly, shooting straight into the distorted bubble-like time domain. Rustling. The stone, penetrating only 5 feet into the dangerous domain, seemed to endure thousands of years of time in a single instant. In the blink of an eye, it disintegrated into countless specks of dust. Yet these fragments did not drift toward the ground. They froze mid-air, gradually fading until they vanished entirely. Amasta's eye twitched violently, a surge of irritation rising within him. What kind of joke was this? Had the previous druids miscalculated their offering during divination, or was Vetia that reckless, misjudging his abilities? The power of time was not to be trifled with. How could she assume he had the capability to breach it? Certainly, Godric Gryffindor might possess such power, but Amasta was not foolish. What lay before him was merely a phantom recorded by the chaotic temporal flux enveloping Avalon Island. Even if Gryffindor had broken through this temporal barrier a millennium ago, centuries had passed. The barrier repaired itself, and Amasta would not foolishly charge headlong only to be utterly annihilated. Knowing he lacked the ability to breach the time domain, Amasta wasted no time. He turned to leave, planning to enter the hall through the main door instead. Vetia would have to have used a safe path to enter, and he intended to confront her first, subdue and interrogate her thoroughly. As for Gryffindor's next move, Amasta had already anticipated it. Either he, too, could not breach the domain, or he might dare to enter it, fearless of time's power. But the result would surely be the same. He would gain nothing. Otherwise, why would the druids of countless centuries still obsess over this place? Don't worry. Follow me. Just as Amasta turned to leave, a slightly heavy voice from behind made his pupils constrict violently, his body freezing in place. Chapter 120, Gryffindor's Sacred Sword and the Twin Serpent Wand, Part 1. Amasta whipped around, staring in disbelief at Godric Gryffindor, silver sword raised facing the time domain. Every fiber of his being trembled. Impossible. Did he just imagine hearing that? Amasta's panicked gaze swept the dim temple inch by inch, searching for any hidden presence. But the tattered rooms revealed nothing. No wizards lurked here besides him and Gryffindor. "Were you speaking to me, Mr. Gryffindor?" His voice stammered under shock. But Gryffindor, shattering Amasta's world yet again, returned to his previous composure, ignoring Amasta's calls. Hands gripping the hilt, the silver sword raised high. He stood still, observing the time domain before him. Uh, what on earth is happening? Amasta whispered, shivering, his mind racing. Could it be that 1,000 years ago Gryffindor had a companion and I just heard that person speak? No. That person's power would be far weaker than Gryffindor's, insufficient to influence the timeline. No, Gryffindor never spoke with anyone on this journey, so that's impossible. His knowledge offered no rational explanation. Helplessly, he lingered behind Gryffindor, unsure what to do next. Whoosh! As hesitation gripped him, Gryffindor's silver sword suddenly shone. Its straight, razor-sharp blade became encased in a transparent, water-like magical aura. It was a strange, unfathomable force that Amasta could not comprehend. Yet even across the river of centuries, it sent shivers down his spine. For Gryffindor, navigating this intense temporal turbulence was far from easy. It was like cutting flesh with a dull blade, or using a rusted, serrated saw to slice through wood, slow, grueling, every motion deliberate. Even Amasta found himself holding his breath in tense anticipation. Yet somehow, Gryffindor truly managed to carve out several feet of clear space in the twisted, hazy continuum. Then, stepping to the edge of the area once shrouded by the temporal field, he lifted his sword and struck again. In Amasta's view, the moment Gryffindor entered the time-distorted zone, the image of him that had been present since their entry into the realm vanished. Amasta was left alone, staring blankly at the suddenly leveled patch before him. Was Gryffindor appearing in the modern wizarding world, or have I been unknowingly brought back 1,000 years? Neither scenario was possible. This was nothing more than Amasta's stunned, half-random speculation. So, should he follow? For a Slytherin of his caliber, venturing into an incomprehensible, perilous situation like this would normally be reckless. But if he always let fear dictate his actions, he might as well have stayed at Hogwarts, teaching under Dumbledore's watchful eyes. Resolute, the hesitation in Amasta's lavender eyes faded. Clenching his teeth, he stepped into the space Gryffindor had just cleared, taking a deep breath as he entered the temporal domain. The sensation hit him like being hurled onto a speeding train from a standstill. The sudden dizziness nearly sent him tumbling into the dangerous chaos flanking the cleared path. Gryffindor reappeared in his vision, not as a solitary figure, but as a series of overlapping, staggered silhouettes, reminiscent of how Amasta had experienced the space when approaching the temple. Amasta scanned the narrow strip of clear space, the abyss-like chaos of time on either side. Testing with the edge of his cloak, he brushed against the temporal distortions, the feedback sending cold sweat running down his back. Inside the temporal barrier, all external sights were obscured, and each second stretched as long as a year. Any lapse in caution could reduce him to nothing but dust, scattered into oblivion. After what felt like an eternity, Gryffindor disappeared from view again. Amasta, however, felt an unexpected calm. He surmised that Gryffindor had breached the temporal barrier and entered the inner sanctum. Another dizzying whirl of the world passed, and as his senses cleared, Amasta realized he had crossed through the small doorway, enveloped in the temporal field. He now stood inside the temple's vast, austere main hall. There he saw Vetia at the entrance, her worried gaze fixed on the mist-shrouded marshes beyond. Amasta reasoned that the commotion from his earlier battle had drawn her attention, but, trapped by the chaotic space, she dared not approach. Within the temporal barrier, Amasta's magic and form were perfectly concealed. Vetia did not notice him as he moved silently into the temple, now only a single step away from the sacred relic the Druids had yearned for over centuries. At the center of the circular altar of gray stone stood a peculiar segmented staff. Upright, it continuously infused the earth with death and decay from its embedded base. This was the very source of Avalon's transformation from a once vibrant druidic sanctuary into a desolate wasteland. Though he had never seen it before, the moment Amasta laid eyes on it, he knew its name. The twin serpent staff, Hermes' caduceus from Greek mythology, and it was only a few steps away. A vast, hellish aura emanated from it, making Amasta's heart pound wildly. He swallowed hard. If artifacts truly existed in the wizarding world of Harry Potter, there was no doubt the twin serpent staff would be among them. His gaze was riveted to the two coiled black serpents entwined around the golden staff, and he momentarily forgot to question how such a relic had ended up in Morgan Le Fay's hands, or why it was now a druidic sacred artifact. Oh, what an interesting wand. Compared to Amasta's stunned reaction, Gryffindor appeared composed, even smiling faintly. Circling the staff, he said, I think Slytherin would have loved you. With that, Gryffindor suddenly reached out for the twin serpent staff, seemingly intending to claim it for his dear friend. At that instant, Amasta's body jolted violently. His eyes widened as he stared at the black serpents, recognition dawning with mounting terror. By the end, he was nearly certain these weren't ordinary serpents at all. They were miniature basilisks. Months ago, he had faced a true basilisk himself in the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets. The thought of the chamber made Amasta tighten his grip on his wand, his dry lips moving silently. Could it be that the Slytherins built the chamber not to defend against muggle-born wizards, but to breed basilisks and study the twin serpent staff? Chapter 121, Gryffindor's Sacred Sword and the Twin Serpent Wand, Part 2. The broader one's heart, the wider the world one can perceive. Ever since Amasta first heard the legend of Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets from a fellow young wizard at Hogwarts, he had been puzzled. Among the four founders, perhaps the most formidable and inscrutable, why would Salazar Slytherin be so narrow-minded as to construct a hidden chamber specifically to eliminate Muggle-born or half-blood students? Was preserving pure-blood lineage truly the driving belief guiding his magical path? This doubt lingered until a few months ago when Amasta saw the inner chamber of Slytherin's secret room for himself. Only then did he have reason to believe that Slytherin's motives were far more complex than the rumors suggested. And now, the twin serpent wand before him, radiating a presence that made the heart quiver, further confirmed this. Though Amasta still could not decipher what lay on the cavern's hidden door, it was clear that the basilisk left in Slytherin's outer chamber served a purpose far less simple than legend claimed. Bang! A sudden explosion startled Amasta out of his musings. The dormant twin serpent wand, the moment Gryffindor's hand neared it, erupted with a globe of gray plasma, accompanied by a violent repulsive force. Gryffindor, his palm scorched, staggered back several steps, nearly falling from the altar. Just as Royna said, the indestructible twin serpent wand only yields to its master. Gryffindor's broad face showed no sign of defeat despite the blow. He grinned mischievously, shrugging off the impact, a playful glint in his eyes. Truly deserving of being the ancestor of those little Gryffindors in the house. Amasta's face darkened at the sight. Looks like I can't bring you a gift after all, Salazar. Gryffindor blew on his smoking palm with slight regret, then shifted his gaze to the edge of the altar, where a sword rested on the steps, a golden-hilted blade gleaming with cold steel light. The sword of the fearless King Arthur Pendragon of Camelot, the broken steel holy sword. Gryffindor, abandoning his intent to gift it to a friend, stepped forward and crouched before the sacred blade. The light in his eyes radiated such intensity it made one's soul tremble. Awe-inspiring warrior. What a pity, Gryffindor murmured with regret. If we had lived in the same era, we would have been each other's greatest rivals and most kindred comrades. As his words fell, the broken steel holy sword, suppressed for centuries by his faith and courage, and the power of the twin serpent wand began to tremble violently as though desperate to break free from the earth. You wish to follow me? Gryffindor seemed to understand the hum of the sword. His eyes widened in surprise, then settled with understanding. Indeed, a sword like you belongs on the battlefield, not to lie dormant forever in this sunless world. But your mission. He glanced at the twin serpent wand, which, even under the combined suppression of the broken steel holy sword and Merlin's magic, continued to emit a ceaseless aura of death and decay. Gryffindor's expression reflected mild difficulty. Impossible. Although Gryffindor had yet to decide, Amasta, observing the scene, felt a subtle shift in his own expression. His gaze flicked between the silver sword once belonging to him and the legendary broken steel holy sword, immortalized in both Muggle and Wizarding tales, and a tentative realization formed in his mind. Very well, old friend. Looks like I'll need your help. As expected, after a brief hesitation, Gryffindor looked at his sword with regret. Clang! The broken steel holy sword, dormant for centuries, floated into the air at Gryffindor's words, exploding in a dazzling golden light. The empty temple hall and even Avalon Island itself trembled violently. The twin serpents on the wand began writhing along its golden shaft, opening their venomous maws and spewing waves of gray, life-repelling magic. Gryffindor's red hair whipped wildly. In response to the agitated twin serpent wand, his massive form radiated an overwhelming aura capable of shattering sky and earth. He lifted his silver sword, driving it into the ground, hands gripping the hilt. Like molten magma, thick crimson magic poured from his sword into the earth, flowing unceasingly, a force of pure, unyielding power. Amasta watched the scene unfold from a millennium past, an unknown moment frozen in time. Though the centuries prevented him from fully sensing Gryffindor's incomprehensible magical power, his emotions still surged uncontrollably. Under Gryffindor's immense effort, the quivering space gradually stilled. Intense magic spread along the fissures in the altar, creeping toward the twin serpent staff, forming an alchemical pattern around it. Hiss! The two basilisks clinging to the staff seemed almost alive, their amber eyes radiating deep resentment. Yet, under Gryffindor's suppression, they reluctantly closed their eyes. Swish! The broken steel sword, shimmering with golden magic, trembled in midair before cutting through the air and landing into Gryffindor's open hand. Gryffindor's legendary sword? Is it King Arthur's broken steel sword? Amasta's face twisted in disbelief. It felt as if his entire worldview had been upended. But almost immediately, he murmured to himself in confusion. Records of Gryffindor's sword state clearly that his famed heirloom was forged by elves, yet the design of these two swords couldn't be more different. Since entering this mysterious realm, Amasta had felt like a first year at Hogwarts all over again, overwhelmed and baffled by one wonder after another. Yet his doubts about Gryffindor's sword were soon resolved by what happened next. The moment Gryffindor grasped the broken steel sword, golden and crimson magic violently collided. A sword carrying the will of its original owner would never submit to anyone without being conquered first. Only by mastering it could one wield it. The endless interplay of gold and red dazzled Amasta's vision, and even interfered with Gryffindor's millennia-old residual imprint in this place. The fiery figure of the legendary wizard flickered like a television image caught in a powerful electromagnetic surge. A hearty laugh rang in Amasta's ears. Through the shifting, blurred light, Gryffindor faced him, holding up a molten piece of metal and declaring with unshakable vigor, "I will have the finest elves reforging your body, and when it is done, you will have a new name to continue your legend." Gryffindor's exploration of the hidden realm was nearing its end. He reached into his robes and flung a cracked, weathered stone pillar into the air. Amasta's eyes widened. It was identical to the one in Vedia's hands, instantly reminding him of Gryffindor's earliest words. It seemed Gryffindor could use this pillar to orient himself within and outside the hidden realm. As when he had first entered, half his body pushed into the hazy, warped space, as if preparing to leave. Wait. Just as Amasta thought he would say farewell to Gryffindor's temporal imprint, the legendary wizard suddenly paused mid-step, turned, and looked at him, smiling. Since the appearance of Gryffindor's apparition, their paths had crossed many times, yet his gaze had never truly settled on Amasta. It always passed through him, focused elsewhere. But now his eyes seemed to traverse time, falling directly on Amostar Brain a millennium later. Amasta realized immediately. His breath quickened, his heart raced. Recalling Gryffindor's earlier words, "Do not be afraid, follow me," he was nearly certain Gryffindor had some way of seeing himself 1,000 years in the future. The answers to all your questions lie within Slytherin's chamber. Chapter 122, The Pawn Rumble, Crash, Rattle. As Godric Gryffindor departed, the space around the altar seemed to collapse like a vanishing mirage. The echoes of his presence disappeared in an instant, as though centuries had passed in a heartbeat. When the light and shadows cleared again, the altar floor was thickly coated with dust. The temporal barriers surrounding the hall remained intact. Vetia still stood by the grand doors of the temple, gazing toward the marshlands, completely unaware that Amasta had silently entered the altar and now stood just a step away from the twin serpent wand, the sacred object the modern druids had longed for across countless generations. Amasta stared at the silver sword planted in the ground, his expression blank. Gryffindor's parting words echoed endlessly in his mind. Salazar Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets. All the answers to your doubts lie there. A heavy, involuntary breath escaped him, Ever since he had seen that memory he had sealed away, he had known a day would come when he would have to open the chamber. Yet he had never imagined the reason would come from a revelation left behind by Gryffindor himself. All the doubts. How many questions had Amasta carried in his heart? If he tried to list them, it would take ages. Before entering this hidden sanctuary, he merely sought to understand why the Druids lay. Prophecy involved him, and what Vatia meant by Merlin's eternal resting place. But now, having entered this secret realm, none of his previous questions had been answered. Instead, new mysteries had only multiplied. It was undeniable that the four founders had conspired to destroy the twin serpent wand. Salazar Slytherin had created the Chamber of Secrets and bred a true basilisk for that purpose. Before entering this sanctuary, Godric Gryffindor had likely foreseen Amasta's presence, perhaps through prophecy, and once inside, he had used methods unknown to assist Amasta in approaching the twin serpent wand. Why did both the four founders and the Druid's prophecy assume I could wield the twin serpent wand? The indestructible twin serpent wand only yields to its master. Amasta remembered Gryffindor's words and the scene when the wand erupted with magical power at Gryffindor's touch. That force was immense. Even Gryffindor could not fully resist it. At the center of the altar, the legendary wand, sealed for over a dozen centuries, lay silently under Amasta's gaze. Why must they destroy you, even scheming 1,000 years in advance? The traces left by two of the founders were already visible to Amasta. But what of Rowena Ravenclaw and Helga Hufflepuff? He had a strong sense that if he insisted on pursuing the truth, eventually those two would manifest before him. Beyond these questions, the massive murals on the stone wall in the rear hall posed their own unresolved riddles. How had the twin serpent wand come into Morgana Le Fay's possession, becoming the druid's sacred relic? And what of the shadowy figure within her, mentioned both in legend and the murals? At the final mural, Merlin, the only remaining figure, somehow obtained the temple and used King Arthur's broken steel holy sword to suppress the twin serpent wand. But then, where did Merlin go? Did he vanish into the currents of time? All these mysteries formed a vast, invisible web over Amasta, suffocating him with unspoken pressure. A restless light flickered in his eyes. He felt the urge to abandon all this, to stop chasing answers, to focus solely on studying magic and honing his strength, forsaking the pursuit of hidden truths. Tap, tap, tap. Once again, a wizard stepped into the ancient altar. Centuries after Gryffindor, the old magical arrays he had left were now cracked, with many nodes blocked, disrupting the flow of magic. As a result, the power of the artifact began to leak once more, infusing the ground with corrupt, life-decaying energy. If Amasta chose to abandon the attempt, letting the twin serpent wand remain, Avalon Island would eventually collapse under the relentless erosion of this power, and the entire space would be lost in the boundless void. Perhaps feeling fatigued, Vatia abandoned her watch by the temple doors. She looked at the altar, shrouded in an opaque barrier, its interior hidden from view. Folding her arms around her knees, she sat on the white stone threshold. Alone, her emerald eyes revealed a hint of confusion, her delicate, fragile frame emanating quiet helplessness. Amasta, watching from behind the barrier, sighed deeply. He felt a pang of pity for the young priestess, who in the wizarding world might barely have graduated from Hogwarts. He did not know whether the druids themselves were aware of what lay upon the altar hidden behind the barrier. It was unclear where they had received the insight that the twin serpent staff could help them escape their desperate predicament. Having witnessed the battles depicted on the murals and Gryffindor's displayed power, Amasta was not doubting the staff's potency. Yet, every clue suggested this was far from simple. He and the druids were likely just pawns in a far greater, mysterious scheme. Should he flee or face it head-on? Amasta's expression remained impassive as he took in the grandeur of the temple. Inside, his mind wrestled with hesitation. He understood perfectly well that this decision would shape the course of his life. Different choices could lead him down completely divergent paths. After a long pause, he shook his head lightly and allowed a faint, inexplicable smile to appear. There was really no need to hesitate, was there? He had already made his choice. Standing before the golden staff, Amasta's heart raced and his breathing quickened. Over the years, he had traveled extensively through the wizarding world, encountering legendary magical artifacts, yet he had never felt compelled by them. He had even willingly handed Ravenclaw's diadem to Dumbledore. The reason was simple. Amasta believed that true power belonged only to that which one could wield personally. Power gained through external objects could always be taken away. But the staff was different. The twin serpent staff gave him a distinct, intoxicating sense of potential. If he could truly harness its power, he would instantly become an unstoppable force in the modern wizarding world. Neither the greatest contemporary white wizard, Albus Dumbledore, nor the lurking Voldemort, plotting his return from the shadows, nor even Gellert Grindelwald, the first dark wizard whose convictions had been lost in Nurmengard, would pose any threat to him. With the Twin Serpent Staff, Amasta could unify the magical civilizations of Earth, establish a magnificent wizarding empire, and even march upon the Muggle world, ultimately claiming the title of the true ruler of Earth. In a wizarding world weakened as it was now, nothing could stand in his way if he chose this path. Chapter 123, Breaking the Shackles. Ambition grows exponentially with power, and Amasta was no saint. Only the dead could claim such a title. He did not crave authority for its own sake. He understood that authority is merely the outward expression of power. A wizard like Cornelius Fudge derived his position entirely from an intact social order, a fragile construct that could crumble at any moment. Amasta's desire for power was greater than most, born partly from human instinct, and partly from the jarring experience of being transported through time. He had felt his own helplessness, and now he yearned desperately for the ability to control his own fate, and that power now lay directly before him, within reach. As his mind shifted, the magic around him surged violently. His ambition galloped unchecked like a wild horse, filling his thoughts with visions of triumph. He imagined himself achieving his dreams, building an epic wizarding empire. Hundreds of thousands of wizards from across the world would gather, gazing at him in awe from the clouds. Behind them, billions of muggles would chant his name as though worshipping a god. What a magnificent sight! Amasta closed his eyes, arms outstretched as he embraced the void, whispering in delirium. Since the dawn of human civilization, none had matched his potential. None had ever wielded such power. He would be immortal. His words would be divine revelations. Statues would rise in his honor atop the highest peaks of the earth. His greatness would be remembered through the ages, no matter how the world changed. And now, it was within his grasp. One step, one pull of the twin serpent staff, and he could command it. To submit to its power would allow him to sweep aside all threats in the magical world. Albus Dumbledore himself would have to bow, presenting the title of greatest contemporary wizard with both hands. Just submit. Eyes closed, lost in fantasy, Amasta repeated the word over and over, his back arching, his knees bending, as if preparing to kneel before the staff. The two basilisks on the golden staff kept their eyes tightly shut, mouths open in silent mockery. The twin serpent staff cannot be conquered. It submits only to its true master. And just as Amasta teetered on the edge of total surrender to ambition and desire, a figure suddenly appeared before him, Gryffindor, hair blazing red, his back turned. And the whispered words he had spoken earlier thundered in Amasta's mind, snapping his tightly closed eyes open. Swish! In an instant, all the illusory images in Amasta's mind shattered like bubbles, dissolving into nothing. Clear, rational thought returned to his pale violet eyes. Chapter 123, Surge. Cold sweat dripped like water down Amasta's pale cheeks. His heart pounded as if drums were beating inside his chest, and he staggered back several steps, eyes locked on the wand, filled with indescribable terror. So close, just a fraction closer. If he hadn't remembered Gryffindor's words at the critical moment, Amasta would have almost become a puppet of this artifact. Terrifying, he whispered to himself, still trembling. Those few seconds might very well have been the most dangerous of his entire life in the wizarding world. The twin serpent wand only obeys its master. That meant only its true owner could wield its power. Amasta? Of course not. Its master was the legendary dark witch Morgana Le Fay, or the shadow hidden within her, not Amasta Blaine. I'm the only one who can help retrieve the druid's sacred artifact from Merlin's eternal resting place. A sheen of sweat ran down Amasta's back as he glared at Vettia Creona at the door. Any trace of pity he had felt vanished completely, replaced by an impulse to curse her out loud. Wiping the sweat from his brow, Amasta turned to leave, intending to check if the temporal breach he had just used still existed. But as he pivoted, his face froze, pale and contorted with pain. Magic. Within the barrier, the magic contained in the temporal fissure suddenly surged, flooding into Amasta's body like a tidal wave. In just a single breath, he understood exactly what was happening. Another magical eruption. Counting his childhood awakening and the sudden surge at Hogwarts months ago, this was the third such eruption in his life. And this one had been triggered because he had successfully resisted the Twin Serpent Wand's seduction, letting reason triumph over the reckless ambition to control power far beyond his capabilities. Magic comes from the soul. Every time a wizard's spirit undergoes profound purification, their magical power can undergo unpredictable transformations. For someone as exceptionally gifted as Amasta, such changes were particularly dramatic. Thanks to his prior experience, Amasta handled this with practiced ease. The moment he realized what was happening, he activated the runes etched into his eyes. The vortex inside spun like an engine at full power, compressing and storing the invisible, cloud-like magic in his eyes. Gradually, the purple of his irises deepened. What is this? A blessing in disguise. He stared into the water mirror, seeing two pure, gem-like purple eyes reflected back, so vivid that even the shape of his pupils had subtly changed. Scratching his head, Amasta forced a wry, helpless smile. The swelling sensation in his body and eyes told him his strength had grown once again. Not that he could instantly crush someone like Albus Dumbledore, but his actual power had now once again approached the mask of strength he had been projecting. The problem is, how am I supposed to face anyone looking like this? Even the simplest-minded person will notice my eyes aren't normal. Crossing another threshold on his magical path was exhilarating, but the side effects left Amasta anxious. If he didn't address this, people would label him a freak. After a moment of thought, he reversed his wand, directing a silvery mist from its tip toward his eyes. Layer by layer, the mist built a thin lens over his irises. As the silver fog dissipated, the color of his eyes faded at a visible pace, returning to their original appearance. Although Dumbledore-level wizards would still see through this, others shouldn't detect it. Very practical illusion magic. I owe you one, Professor Lockhart. A long breath escaped him as he dissipated the water mirror, smiling faintly. Chapter 1. The End of the Chamber, Part 1. Of course, I've been played. Watching the stone vanish into the barrier, Amasta ground his teeth in frustration. By all logic, if he could follow Gryffindor's temporal traces through the barrier to reach the inner chamber, it seemed to indicate that this safe rift had existed for 1,000 years. Yet now, after Amasta passed through it, the rift had strangely vanished. No wonder all the Druids' previous high priests over the centuries never discovered it. It seems this was left here specifically for me by Godric Gryffindor. Amasta pressed his lips together, a hint of grim resolve in his voice. Without that passage, he could not leave the altar on his own. In other words, aside from attempting to seize the Twin Serpent staff again, he had almost no other options. He did not know why the four founders of Hogwarts had left behind so many arrangements and contingencies, nor what their ultimate goal of destroying the Twin Serpent staff might have been. But Amasta could not bring himself to approve of their actions, which seemed so indifferent to dragging him into their schemes. Gazing at the enigmatic staff, he sighed quietly, a sound heavy with helplessness. From the perspective of the modern wizarding world, Amasta was undoubtedly powerful. Yet against the Hogwarts founders of 1,000 years ago, or Merlin himself, now fully enshrined in myth, he was undeniably weak. Weakness is an original sin. Whether in the Muggle world or the wizarding world, it is an unshakable truth. Blaming those long gone and swallowed by time was pointless. He could only blame his own insufficiency. Avalon had slumbered in death's embrace for centuries. In all that time, no one had set foot on this legendary island except the previous high priests. Vithia, arms wrapped around her knees, gazed toward the marshlands, her glowing eyes clouded with long-standing worry. From everything she had learned and investigated, Amostar Brain appeared to be an incredibly powerful wizard, but such power only mattered against the backdrop of the modern magical world. Compared to the ancient, mythic era, Amostar Brain was far less extraordinary. Deep inside, Vithia had always harbored doubts about her teacher's divinations. She did not understand why a wizard with no prior connection to the Druids could be believed capable of helping them acquire the legendary relic.